There's one thing about a rising PSA number that nobody ever explained to me until I nearly made the worst mistake of my life over it at 2 in the morning. It was 2:14, and I was typing my own PSA number into a search bar with my thumb shaking. A large share of men over 50 carry some degree of prostate enlargement, and almost none of them are ever told that in the moment they need it most. I found that number myself that night, scrolling through pages that only made the fear worse. What I didn't know yet is that the number on my lab report and the disease I was picturing were two very different things. And by the end of this video, I'll walk you through the 3 things I wish someone had told me before I ever reached for my phone. I'm 83 now, and I still get my number checked every single year right on schedule. But these days I read the results standing in the hallway, hand it back to the nurse, and go get coffee with my wife like it's any other Tuesday. I'm not telling you that to sound like I've got it all figured out. I'm telling you because for years I thought keep an eye on it was the best anyone could offer me, and it took me far too long to find out that wasn't true. I'd gone in for a routine blood draw, nothing more, the same one I'd had a dozen times before. The nurse called 2 days later and read me a number I didn't recognize, higher than the one from the year before, and then said the words that undid me. "Your doctor wants to talk to you about it." She meant well. She had no idea what that sentence would do to me once I hung up the phone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there next to my wife, doing math in my head that didn't add up to anything except worst case after worst case. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, I got up, went to the kitchen table, and opened my laptop because doing nothing felt worse than doing something, even if the something was terrifying. That's when I found myself typing the number into a search bar at 2 in the morning, the blue light of the screen the only thing lit in the house. Every result I clicked seemed to confirm the fear I'd walked in with. I read about biopsies. I read about surgery. I read forum threads from men who sounded exactly as scared as I was, offering each other guesses instead of answers, because none of us actually understood what we were looking at. By sunrise, I hadn't slept a minute, and I'd made a decision that embarrasses me now. I decided I would call my son that weekend and tell him. I even rehearsed it in the shower, out loud, the way you rehearse a speech you're dreading. "Son, I need to talk to you about something." I got that far 3 separate times and stopped every time, because I couldn't figure out how to say the next part without sounding like I was already saying goodbye to something. So I didn't call. I just carried it alone for another 11 days until the actual appointment, telling no one, sleeping badly, snapping at small things that had nothing to do with any of it. My doctor, when I finally sat across from him, had 8 minutes in a full waiting room behind the door. He said the number was up, said we'd keep monitoring it, and moved on to my blood pressure before I'd even opened my mouth to ask the question that had kept me up for 11 nights. I left that office with less understanding than I'd walked in with, because now I had a doctor's confirmation attached to a fear nobody had actually explained to me. I want to be fair to him. He's not careless, and he's not hiding anything on purpose. A rushed morning of patients doesn't leave room for a real conversation about what a single number does and doesn't mean, and I don't think he ever realized how much silent damage that gap was doing to men like me, one appointment at a time. Here's the first thing I wish I'd known before that 2 a.m. search. That number, the one that sent me spiraling, measures your prostate, not cancer. It's a marker of activity in the gland itself, and it rises for a whole list of ordinary, non-threatening reasons. Age is the biggest one. As a man gets older, the prostate very commonly grows larger, a benign process that has nothing to do with malignancy on its own, and that growth alone is enough to nudge the number upward year after year. Inflammation is another. A minor irritation in the gland, something as unremarkable as a recent bike ride or a minor infection, can push that number higher temporarily without anything sinister happening underneath it. I didn't know any of that at 2 in the morning. I only knew the number was up, and up felt like a verdict. The second thing I wish I'd known is that a rising number and a cancer diagnosis are not the same sentence, even though every search result I clicked that night made them sound identical. An enlarged prostate isn't cancer, and having one doesn't automatically raise your risk of developing it. The number is a starting point for a conversation, not the conversation's conclusion. I wish someone had said that to me in plain language before I ever rehearsed that speech in the shower for my son. For years, one number ran my life, the PSA. It would tick up a point, and I'd lie awake the whole night, certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. The third thing took me longer to find because nobody hands it to you on a 5-minute checkup. I started reading, really reading, not doom scrolling, about what actually supports comfort in the lower urinary tract as men age, separate from the number itself. That's where I came across quercetin, a flavonoid compound found in ordinary foods like onions, apples, and brewed tea. It's been studied as an anti-inflammatory compound, and it's associated with comfort in the lower urinary tract for men dealing with the kind of day-to-day irritation that so often rides alongside a benign, enlarging gland. I want to be precise about what that means and what it doesn't. This isn't something that moves a lab number. It isn't aimed at cancer risk in any direction. It's aimed at comfort, the ordinary, physical experience of living inside an aging body, and that is a completely separate target from anything your yearly blood draw is measuring. I started adding quercetin-rich foods into meals I was already eating anyway. A red onion sliced into a salad instead of left in the drawer. An apple with the skin on, since that's where most of it concentrates. A cup of tea in the afternoon instead of another coffee. Small, boring, sustainable changes, the kind that don't make headlines but that I could actually keep doing for years without burning out on them. I didn't stop there because one habit standing alone rarely does much. I built a small stack around it, 3 things working together instead of one thing carrying all the weight. First, the quercetin-rich foods themselves, worked into meals rather than treated as a separate project. Second, cutting back on the things that pile inflammation on top of an already sensitive gland, fried food, heavily processed meat, the extra glass of wine that used to be routine. That kind of dietary load has been associated with worse urinary symptoms in men as they age, and trimming it costs nothing but a little discipline. Third, and maybe most important, keeping my yearly number check exactly where it belonged on the calendar, never as an afterthought. Never as something to push off because I finally felt calmer. Comfort in daily life and vigilance about the number aren't in competition with each other. They're supposed to run side by side. None of these 3 pieces were dramatic on their own, and that's exactly what made them sustainable. I wasn't overhauling my whole life at 81. I was swapping a bag of chips for an apple, choosing tea over a second coffee some afternoons, and leaving the calendar reminder for my next blood draw exactly where it had always been. My wife noticed before I did, actually. She said I'd stopped sighing every time the mail came because I wasn't half expecting another letter from the clinic to knock the wind out of me the way the first one had. I gave it close to 2 months before I trusted what I was feeling instead of judging it after one good week. That patience mattered more than any single ingredient did. I wasn't chasing a transformation. I was just paying attention to whether the ordinary discomforts of getting older were easing gradually, the way real change actually tends to arrive. Somewhere around week 5, I realized I'd gone several nights without getting up more than once, and I hadn't been keeping score, which told me more than any dramatic before and after ever could have. I also stopped rereading old lab reports at midnight, which had quietly become a habit of its own. For a long stretch after that first scare, I'd pull up the portal on my phone and stare at old numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something friendlier if I looked hard enough. Once I understood what the number was actually measuring, that particular ritual just fell away on its own. I didn't have to force myself to stop. I simply didn't need to anymore. Last fall, my wife and I took our grandson camping for 3 nights, sleeping in a tent on the ground the way I used to when I was young enough not to think twice about it. I didn't spend the trip calculating how far the nearest bathroom was, or dreading the long drive home the way I once would have. I just fished and slept and came home sunburned and tired in the good way. I think often about a man named Lonzo, 66, who left a comment describing almost exactly the night I'd had. The search bar at 2 a.m., the number that didn't make sense, the fear of calling his daughter and not knowing how to start the sentence. He said he'd carried it alone for nearly 2 weeks before his appointment, the same way I had, telling no one because he didn't want to watch someone he loved absorb a fear he didn't fully understand himself yet. Lonzo told me that once his doctor finally explained the actual mechanism, the reframe about benign enlargement, the difference between a number and a diagnosis, he felt something shift that he hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but room to breathe again. He started asking one specific written question at every visit after that, instead of walking in with a vague cloud of worry, and he said it changed the tone of every appointment that followed. He also told me he started keeping onions and apples in the house on purpose now, small and unremarkable, but his, a routine instead of a scramble. He told me one more thing that stuck with me. He said the hardest part hadn't been the number itself. It had been the 11 days he spent rehearsing how to tell his daughter without watching her face fall. Once he finally sat her down, calmer and better informed than he'd been that first week, the conversation took maybe 4 minutes and went nothing like the version he'd been dreading in his head. He said he wished someone had told him that fear rehearses worse conversations than the ones that actually happen, almost every time. If you are on any medication for your prostate, your heart, or your blood pressure, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces your treatment or your screening schedule, and you should never stop or adjust a medication without your doctor's guidance. Keep getting your number checked every single year, without exception, exactly as scheduled, whether you feel calm about it or not. The monitoring and the comfort work belong together, not one instead of the other. Here's what I settled on, a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. What I want you to walk away with is this. Those 3 things, that the number measures the gland and not the disease you're picturing, that a rise is not a verdict, and that comfort is something you can support in ordinary daily ways alongside your doctor and your yearly check, would have spared me 11 sleepless nights and a rehearsed speech I never had the courage to finish in front of my son. I think about the man who sat at that kitchen table at 2 a.m, thumbs shaking over a phone, certain he already knew how the story ended. And I think about the man I am now, who still gets the same test every year, who still sees the same number climb a little most years, and who no longer mistakes that climb for a sentence being read against him. That's the difference 11 years in a little real understanding made. Not a cure, not a promise, just a man who finally stopped bracing for the worst every time a number appeared on a piece of paper. If you've ever typed your own number into a search bar at an hour you're not proud of, or rehearsed a conversation with someone you love and couldn't finish it, tell me about that night in the comments. I read every one myself. And if an honest explanation like this one is worth something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this every week, for every man still lying awake with a number he doesn't understand yet.